The transport ship landed with a loud thud on the metal platform of Station Vega 7. Lee Tae-min pressed his face against the small window and looked out at the massive space station. It was bigger than anything he had ever seen. The station stretched out in all directions with tall towers and spinning rings that caught the light from 3 different suns. "Welcome to the Galactic Military Academy," announced the ship's computer in a voice that sounded like grinding metal. Tae-min picked up his small bag and walked toward the exit with the other new cadets. His hands were sweating and his heart was beating fast. He was the first human ever accepted into this academy. Most of the other species had been sending their best young warriors here for hundreds of years. The door opened with a hiss, and Tae-min stepped onto the platform. The air smelled different here, clean but cold with a metallic taste. Gravity felt normal, which was good. Some stations had gravity that was too heavy or too light for humans. Around him, the other new cadets were also getting off their transport ships. Tae-min had studied about the different alien races, but seeing them in person was still amazing. A group of Dekmari walked past him. They looked like walking crystals, their bodies made of clear blue stone that sparkled in the station's lights. Each step they took made a soft ringing sound, like wind chimes. Near the edge of the platform, several Velthari were talking in voices that sounded like water flowing over rocks. Their skin was smooth and blue-green, and they moved like they were swimming even though they were walking on dry ground. One of them had gills that opened and closed on the sides of his neck. The strangest ones were the Quinder. They looked like ghosts made of colored light. One floated past Tae-min, her body shifting from yellow to purple to green. She had no solid form, just energy that moved and danced in the shape of a person. "You must be the human," said a voice. Behind him, Tae-min turned around and saw a Dekmari cadet. The crystal being was tall, maybe 7 feet, and his body was a deep blue color with streaks of silver running through it. "Yes, I'm Lee Tae-min," he said, trying to sound confident. "I am called Crystal in your language," the crystal being said. His voice was like music, with each word ringing like a bell. "I have heard much about your species. You are the first to be accepted here." "That's right," Tae-min replied. "I'm honored to be here." Crystal's crystal head turned slightly, which Tae-min guessed was like a nod. "Your people are known to be creative problem solvers. We shall see if that helps you here." Before Tae-min could ask what he meant, a loud voice echoed across the platform. "All new cadets report to Assembly Hall 7 immediately." The voice belonged to something that looked like a giant metal insect. It had 6 arms, each ending in sharp claws, and its head was covered in what looked like black armor. When it moved, Tae-min could hear the sound of gears and motors inside its body. "That is Commander Velthek," Crystal explained as they walked toward the hall. "He is a Mechani. His people replace their body parts with machines as they grow older. He has been an instructor here for 50 years. The assembly hall was enormous. The ceiling was so high that Tae-min could barely see it. Hundreds of cadets filled the rows of seats. Tae-min found an empty spot and sat down. He noticed that most of the other cadets sat with their own species. The Dekmari clinked softly as they moved. The Velthari made quiet splashing sounds. The Quinder floated above their seats rather than sitting on them. Tae-min felt very alone. Commander Velthek walked to the front of the hall. His metal feet clanked against the floor with each step. When he spoke, his voice was amplified by speakers built into his throat. "Welcome, cadets, to your new home for the next 4 years," he began. "You are here because you are the best your species has to offer. You have passed the entrance tests. You have proven your worth, but that was just the beginning." The commander's red mechanical eyes swept across the room. When they stopped on Tae-min, the human felt like he was being scanned by a computer. "This academy will test you in ways you cannot imagine," Velthek continued. "You will learn to fight in zero gravity. You will survive in hostile environments. You will work together with species that your ancestors might have considered enemies. Many of you will fail. Some of you will quit. A few will not survive." A nervous whisper ran through the crowd of cadets. Tae-min's mouth felt dry. But for those who succeed, you will become officers in the greatest military force the galaxy has ever known. You will protect worlds. You will explore the unknown. You will face dangers that would destroy lesser beings. Commander Velthik walked to a control panel and pressed several buttons. Behind him, a massive screen lit up. It showed a wall of ice that seemed to stretch forever upward. The ice was so white it hurt to look at, and frost covered every surface. "This is the Nightmare Wall," the commander announced. "It stands 500 meters high and is located on the Academy's training moon. The ice is harder than steel and colder than space. For the past 200 years, every cadet who graduates from this academy must climb this wall." Taemin stared at the image. The wall looked impossible to climb. It was completely smooth, with no handholds or ledges. Ice hung from it like giant fangs. "Many species cannot even attempt the climb," Velthek continued. "The cold would kill them in minutes. Others have tried and failed. Some have died trying. The wall does not care about your species' advantages. It does not care about your technology. It only cares if you have the strength, the skill, and the will to overcome it." A Quinder cadet raised her glowing hand. "Commander, what makes the wall so difficult?" "Surely, with proper equipment, the wall generates an energy field that disrupts most technology," Velthik interrupted. "Heating devices fail. Anti-gravity units stop working. Plasma cutters cannot penetrate the ice. The wall has defeated cadets from every species in the galaxy." Taemin looked around the room. Some cadets seemed excited by the challenge. Others looked worried. The Velthari were whispering to each other in their water-like language, and they seemed nervous. "You have 4 years to prepare," the commander said. "Use them wisely. Classes begin tomorrow at dawn. Dormitory assignments are on your personal data pads. Dismissed." As the cadets began to leave the hall, Taemin remained in his seat, staring at the image of the Nightmare Wall. How could anyone climb something like that? It looked like it was made to be impossible. "Impressive, is it not?" said a voice next to him. Tae-Min turned and saw a Velthari cadet. She was smaller than the others he had seen, with skin that was more green than blue. Her large eyes were the color of deep ocean water. "I'm Aquilin," she said in accented but clear human language. "I have been studying your species since I learned a human would be joining us." "Nice to meet you," Taemin replied. "What do you think about that wall?" Aquilin's gills fluttered slightly. "I think it will be very difficult for my people. We do not handle extreme cold well. Our body water can freeze if we are not careful." She paused and looked at him curiously. "But humans are known to be unpredictable. Perhaps you will find a way that others have not considered." As they walked out of the hall together, Taemin wondered what she meant. He was just a regular person from Earth? He had no special powers? Like the other species? He couldn't manipulate energy or crystal or water. All he had was his human brain and whatever strength he could build in his human body. Maybe that would have to be enough. 3 weeks had passed since Taemin arrived at the academy. He was slowly getting used to life on Station Vega 7, but it was not easy. Every day brought new challenges that reminded him how different he was from the other cadets. His dormitory room was small but comfortable. He shared it with another human who had arrived a week after him. Kim Jae-sung was older than Taemin, maybe 25, and had been a soldier on Earth before applying to the academy. He had short black hair and serious eyes that seemed to notice everything. "The food processors still don't understand human nutrition," Jae-sung said one morning as he looked at his breakfast. The gray paste on his plate was supposed to be eggs and rice, but it tasted like cardboard mixed with salt water. "At least it's better than last week," Taemin replied, trying to be positive. "Remember when they gave us that blue stuff that made our tongues numb?" Jae-sung smiled slightly. It was rare to see him smile. "The Velthari love that stuff. Aquilin told me it tastes like their favorite ocean plants." Taemin had become friends with several alien cadets over the past weeks. Aquilin was kind and patient, always willing to explain things about alien culture that confused him. Crixto was harder to understand, but he seemed to respect Taemin's effort to learn. The biggest surprise was Zephyra, a Quinder who had started talking to them during combat training. Zephyra was different from the other Quinder. While most of her people kept to themselves and spoke in energy patterns that sounded like static, she had learned several alien languages. Her body was usually a soft golden color, but it changed based on her emotions. When she was excited, she turned bright white. When she was thinking hard, she became deep red. "Today we have weapons training," Jae-sung said as they finished their strange breakfast. "I heard they're going to test us with different types of energy weapons." They walked to the training facility together. The academy was built like a small city, with different sections for classes, training, living quarters, and recreation. Moving walkways helped cadets travel quickly between areas, but Taemin and Jae-sung usually walked. They had learned that physical exercise was important to keep their human bodies strong in the station's artificial environment. The weapons training facility was a large room with high ceilings and thick walls. Instructor Glithmar was waiting. For them, she was a Velthari, but older and larger than Aquilin. Her skin was dark blue-green, and she moved with the confidence of someone who had fought in many battles. "Today you will learn to use standard galactic military energy weapons," she announced as the cadets gathered around her. "These weapons are designed to work for all species, but each of you will have different advantages and disadvantages." She held up a device that looked like a short metal tube with a crystal at one end. "This is a plasma rifle. It fires concentrated energy that can cut through most armor. The weapon draws power from the user's life energy, so the stronger you are, the more powerful your shots will be." Taemin watched as the alien cadets took turns with the weapon. The Quinder were naturally good with it because they were made of energy themselves. Zephyra's shots were so bright they lit up the entire room. The Vekmari were also skilled because they could channel energy through their crystal bodies. Crystal's shots were precise and steady. The Velthari had more trouble. Their water-based biology didn't conduct energy as well. Aquilin's shots were weak and sometimes missed the target completely. When it was Taemin's turn, he lifted the weapon carefully. It was heavier than he expected. He aimed at the practice target and pulled the trigger. A small, weak beam of red light came out and barely reached the target. Some of the other cadets laughed. A Vekmari named Shardax made a sound like breaking glass, which was how his people laughed. "Perhaps humans should stick to throwing rocks," he said in his musical voice. Taemin felt his face turn red, but he didn't say anything. He tried again, concentrating harder. This time the beam was a little stronger, but still much weaker than what the other species could produce. Jae-sung didn't do much better. His shots were steady, but weak. After watching both humans struggle, Instructor Glithmar moved them to a different section of the room. "Some species are not naturally suited for energy weapons," she said quietly. "Perhaps you would do better with traditional projectile weapons." She showed them weapons that fired solid bullets instead of energy beams. These were much older designs, but they worked well for humans. Taemin's aim improved immediately. The weapons felt more natural in his hands, like tools he understood, but using older weapons made him feel even more different from the other cadets. While they fired beautiful beams of colored light, he was shooting simple metal bullets like a primitive warrior. After training, Taemin sat alone in the recreation area. The room had comfortable chairs and entertainment systems designed for different species. Most cadets spent their free time here, but they usually stayed with their own kind. "You look sad," said a voice that sounded like wind chimes. Tae-min looked up and saw Aquilin approaching. Her skin was a lighter shade of green than usual, which he had learned meant she was concerned. "I'm fine," he lied. "No, you are not." She sat down in the chair next to him, moving like water flowing into a container. "The weapons training was difficult for you." "It's not just the weapons," Taemin admitted. "Everything here is difficult for humans. We're not as strong as the Vekmari. We can't manipulate energy like the Quinder. We can't survive in extreme environments like the Velthari. Sometimes I wonder why they even accepted us into the academy." Aquilin was quiet for a moment. Her gills moved slowly as she breathed. "Do you know why I wanted to become friends with you?" She finally asked, because you feel sorry for me? No, her voice became firm. Because you think differently than we do. Yesterday in strategy class, when Instructor Hivemind asked us how to capture an enemy base, all of us gave the same types of answers. Use our species' advantages. Attack with superior force, overwhelm them with technology, Taemin remembered the class. He had been too embarrassed to speak up. But I heard you whisper something to Jae-sung, Aquelin continued. You said you would study the enemy's daily routine and find their weakest moment. You would use misdirection and surprise instead of force. That is not how any of our species thinks. That's just basic human military strategy, Taemin said. Exactly, Aquelin's eyes sparkled. It is basic for humans, but completely new for us. We have been fighting the same way for thousands of years. Our enemies know how we think, but they do not know how humans think. Crystal approached them, his crystal body ringing softly with each step. May I join this conversation? He asked. Politely, of course, Aquelin replied, the tall crystal being sat down carefully. His weight made the chair creak. I have been observing the human cadets with great interest, he said to Taemin. Your performance in individual tests is often poor compared to other species. But in group exercises, something interesting happens. What do you mean? Taemin asked. 3 days ago in the survival simulation, our team was failing badly. The Velthari were too cold. The Quinder were losing energy in the artificial atmosphere. Even I was having trouble with the electromagnetic interference affecting my internal systems. Taemin remembered that exercise. It had been one of the worst experiences of his time at the academy. But then you and Jae-sung took charge, Crystal continued. You organized us into teams based on our abilities. You found ways for each species to help the others. You turned our weaknesses into strengths. We went from last place to third place in just 2 hours. We still came in third, Taemin pointed out. Yes, but the teams that beat us were made up entirely of single species, Aquelin added. They did not face the challenge of working together across different biologies and cultures. What you did was much more difficult. Zephyra floated over to join them. Her body was glowing soft blue, which meant she was curious. Are we talking about the humans? She asked in her static-filled voice. We are discussing their unique approaches to problems, Crystal replied. Ah yes, the creativity factor, Zephyra said, her glow becoming brighter. My people have been studying human behavior since first contact. You solve problems in ways that seem random to us, but they often work better than logical approaches. Taemin looked around at his alien friends. For the first time since arriving at the academy, he felt like maybe he belonged here after all. These beings were some of the most advanced species in the galaxy, and they thought humans had something valuable to offer. Thank you, he said quietly, all of you. I was starting to think I made a mistake coming here. No mistake, Aquelin said firmly. Different does not mean wrong. The academy needs different perspectives, especially when it comes to challenges like the Nightmare Wall. The mention of the wall made everyone quiet. They had all seen the recordings of past attempts. Cadets using every advantage their species possessed and still failing. Advanced technology that stopped working in the wall's energy field. Physical abilities that meant nothing against the smooth, deadly ice. The wall has defeated every approach we know, Crystal said thoughtfully. Perhaps it needs an approach. We do not know. Taemin looked at his friends, a crystal being who conducted energy, a water-based alien who could survive in hostile seas, and a CR. The theoretical tactics classroom was one of Taemin's favorite places in the academy. Unlike the combat training rooms or weapons facilities, this was a quiet space where cadets could think and learn without worrying about their physical limitations. The walls were covered with screens that could display star maps, battle formations, or historical conflicts from across the galaxy. Professor Glithmer stood at the front of the room, using a holographic projector to show three-dimensional models of famous battles. She was different from Instructor Glithmer, who taught weapons training. This Glithmer was smaller and moved more slowly, her dark blue skin marked with silver lines that indicated age and wisdom among the Velthari. Today we will discuss the theoretical impossibility of certain military objectives, she announced in her flowing voice. Not all challenges can be overcome with traditional thinking or standard approaches. Taemin sat in the middle of the classroom, surrounded by his alien friends. Aquilin was taking notes on a waterproof datapad. Crystal's crystal body reflected the light from the holographic displays, creating rainbow patterns on the walls. Zephyra floated slightly above her chair, her energy form pulsing with interest. Jaesung sat behind them as he usually did. The older human preferred to listen and observe before speaking. Taemin had learned to value his roommate's careful approach to new information. Let us examine a case study that is relevant to all of you, Professor Glyphmore continued. She pressed a control and the holographic display changed to show the nightmare wall. The image was incredibly detailed. Taemin could see every texture in the ice, every shadow and reflection. The wall seemed to glow with an inner cold light that made the room feel chilly just looking at it. The nightmare wall has stood unconquered for over 2 centuries, the professor said. During that time, cadets from 47 different species have attempted to climb it. The success rate is exactly 0%. A Vekmari cadet named Clearsong raised her crystal hand. Professor, surely some cadets have succeeded? Otherwise, how would anyone graduate from the academy? An excellent question, Glyphmore replied. The academy defines success as reaching the summit under your own power, without technological assistance and without outside help. By that definition, no cadet has ever succeeded. The classroom erupted in confused whispers. Aquilin's skin turned pale green, which meant she was shocked. Even Zephyr's usual golden glow flickered with uncertainty. Then how does anyone graduate? Asked a Quinder cadet whose energy form was pulsing red with frustration. The wall is a test of character, not just climbing ability, the professor explained. Cadets are judged on their preparation, their strategy, their courage in attempting to climb, and how far they progress before conditions force them to retreat. Most graduates reach between 100 and 200 meters before the extreme conditions overwhelm them. Taemin felt a cold knot form in his stomach. If aliens with natural advantages couldn't climb the wall, what chance did humans have? Let us examine why the wall is considered impossible, Glyphmore continued. She used her controls to highlight different sections of the wall. First, the composition. This is not ordinary ice. It is formed from water with an extremely high mineral content, frozen at temperatures approaching absolute zero. The resulting surface is harder than most metals and completely smooth. The display zoomed in to show the wall's surface at the microscopic level. There were no cracks, no rough spots, nothing that could provide a handhold. Second, the temperature. The wall maintains a constant temperature of -400 degrees in your human measurement system. This is cold enough to instantly freeze most biological tissues and to cause many materials to become brittle and break. Aquilin shivered, her gills closing tightly. Taemin knew that her people could survive in very cold water, but not temperatures like this. Third, the energy field. The wall generates an electromagnetic pulse that disables most advanced technology within 50 meters. Anti-gravity devices fail. Heated clothing stops working. Even simple electronics like data pads and communicators shut down completely. Several cadets looked down at their data pads with new understanding. Taemin imagined trying to climb the wall without any of the technology he had come to depend on at the academy. Now, let us consider why each major species has failed, the professor continued. The Vekmari have natural resistance to cold temperatures because their crystal bodies do not conduct heat the same way as organic tissue. Crystal's body rang softly, which was how his people showed agreement. However, their rigid structure makes them inflexible. They cannot grip irregular surfaces, and their weight makes them vulnerable to falls. The few handholds they can create by channeling heat energy disappear too quickly in the extreme cold. Clearsong's crystal form dimmed slightly. She had probably been hoping her people's advantages would help her with the wall. The Velthari can manipulate water and ice, which should theoretically give them an advantage, Glithmar continued. They can create temporary handholds by reshaping the ice surface. Aquilin perked up, her skin becoming brighter green. Unfortunately, the extreme temperature affects their biological systems within minutes. Their internal fluids begin to crystallize, slowing their movements and clouding their thoughts. Most Velthari cadets lose consciousness before reaching the 50-meter mark. Aquilin's glow faded again. Taemin reached over and gently touched her arm in what he hoped was a comforting gesture. The Quinder faced the most immediate challenge, the professor said. Their energy-based forms are incompatible with extreme cold. They begin to lose coherence almost immediately upon contact with the wall's energy field. Most cannot even begin the climb. Zephyr's golden light flickered weakly. She had told Taemin once that cold was like death to her people. It drained their life force and made it hard to maintain their shape. What about the Makani? Asked a student. Surely their mechanical bodies could resist the cold and electromagnetic effects? The Makani have attempted the wall many times, Glithmar replied. Their cybernetic components do resist the cold better than organic tissue. However, the electromagnetic field causes their systems to malfunction in unpredictable ways. Some have frozen in place, unable to move. Others have had their motor controls reversed, causing them to climb downward when they meant to go up. Taemin was taking careful notes throughout the lecture. Unlike most of his classmates, he was writing with an old-fashioned pen and paper, rather than using a datapad. The other species found this primitive, but Taemin liked the feel of physically writing down important information. Professor, he said, raising his hand hesitantly, what about species that aren't represented at the Academy? Are there any that might have advantages we haven't considered? An insightful question, Glithmar replied, her gill slits fluttering. With approval. There are several species with theoretical advantages. The rock-eaters of Titan Minor have skin harder than stone and no need for warmth. The gas breathers of the outer nebula have no solid form to freeze. The machine-mens exist as pure information and have no bodies at all. Then why don't they attend the Academy? Jae-sung asked from behind Taemin. The rock-eaters move too slowly for military applications. A single decision takes them several days to make. The gas breathers cannot survive in solid environments for more than a few hours. The machine-mens, while highly intelligent, lack the ability to inspire or lead organic troops. The professor paused and looked directly at Taemin and Jae-sung. Which brings us to the newest species to attempt the Academy, humans. You represent an interesting case study because you have no obvious advantages for the wall climb. Taemin felt every eye in the classroom turn toward him. His face grew warm with embarrassment. Humans cannot manipulate energy like the Quinder. You cannot reshape ice like the Velthari. Your bodies are not resistant to cold like the Vekmari. You have no cybernetic enhancements like the Makani. From a purely theoretical standpoint, humans should perform worse than any species that has ever attempted the wall. The classroom was completely silent. Taemin could hear his own heartbeat. And yet, the professor continued, human military history shows a curious pattern. Your species has a remarkable record of achieving objectives that were considered impossible by more advanced civilizations. She changed the holographic display to show scenes from Earth's history. Taemin recognized some of them, ancient battles where outnumbered human armies had defeated superior forces, explorers reaching places that everyone said were unreachable, inventors creating machines that experts claimed would never work. Humans have climbed the highest mountains on your planet without advanced technology. You have survived in deserts, polar regions, and deep oceans using only simple tools. You have crossed vast distances with primitive vehicles that other species would consider inadequate. Aquilin's skin brightened with interest. What makes them different? She asked. That is the question, is it not? Professor Glithmar replied. From a theoretical standpoint, humans should not be capable of most of their historical achievements. Yet they continue to accomplish what more advanced species consider impossible. Crystal's crystal body chimed thoughtfully. Perhaps their lack of specialization is actually an advantage? Explain your The transport shuttle shook violently as it entered the atmosphere of Training Moon. Delta to 9. Taemin gripped his seat and tried not to look out the window at the frozen wasteland below. The moon was covered in ice and snow as far as the eye could see, with temperatures cold enough to kill most species within minutes. "Attention, cadets," announced Commander Velthic over the intercom. "This is a standard survival exercise. You will be divided into mixed species teams and given basic equipment. Your objective is to establish a base camp and survive for 72 hours in the moon's hostile environment." The shuttle landed with a hard bump on the icy surface. Through the windows, Taemin could see the landscape that would be their home for the next 3 days. There were no plants, no shelter, nothing but endless white ice under a pale gray sky. Taemin was assigned to Team 7 along with his usual friends, Equalen, Crixtal, and Zephyra. 2 other cadets joined them, a Makani named Gearlock, whose body was half organic and half machine, and another human who had arrived at the academy just last month. The new human was Park So-young, a female cadet who had studied engineering on Earth before applying to the academy. She was shorter than Taemin, with practical short hair and intelligent eyes that seemed to analyze everything she looked at. When she spoke, it was always with careful, precise words. Standard equipment includes thermal shelters, heating units, food supplies, and emergency communicators, Commander Velthic announced as they gathered outside the shuttle. The cold hit them immediately, even through their protective suits. Equipment failure is part of the challenge. Teams that cannot adapt will be evacuated. He handed each team leader a metal case containing their supplies. Crixtal had been chosen as their leader because his crystal body was naturally resistant to the cold. "Teams will be scattered across different locations on the moon," the commander continued. "You cannot help each other. Radio contact is limited to emergency situations only. Begin establishing your camps immediately. The temperature will drop by another 50 degrees when the sun sets." The shuttles took off, leaving the teams alone on the frozen moon. Team 7 found themselves on a flat plain of ice with no natural shelter in any direction. The wind was strong and constant, making the cold even worse. Crixtal opened their equipment case and began organizing the supplies. "We have 1 thermal shelter, 2 heating units, food for 3 days, and 6 emergency communicators," he announced, his crystal voice barely audible over the wind. The thermal shelter was a dome-shaped tent made from advanced materials that should have kept them warm. Gearlock and Zephyra worked together to set it up while the others arranged the heating units inside, but within an hour, problems began. "The primary heating unit is malfunctioning," Gearlock reported, his mechanical pots clicking with frustration. "Internal temperature is not rising above freezing." Aquilin was already in trouble. Her blue-green skin was turning darker as her body tried to conserve heat. The Velthari could survive in cold water, but this dry, bitter cold was different. Her movements were becoming slow and clumsy. "The secondary heating unit just failed," Zephyra announced, her golden glow flickering weakly. "I can try to supplement it with my own energy, but I will not be able to maintain that for long." Taemin looked around at his struggling teammates. This was exactly what Professor Glithmer had described in class. Each species was vulnerable in ways their natural abilities couldn't overcome. "So-young," he called to the other human, "any ideas?" The female cadet was examining the failed heating units with a small toolkit she carried. "The power cells are draining too fast in this cold," she said calmly. "The units are designed for normal temperatures, not extreme conditions like this." "Then we are in serious trouble," Crixtal said. Even his crystal body was starting to show stress fractures from the rapid temperature changes. "Maybe not," So-young replied. She put away her tools and opened her personal pack. Inside, Taemin was surprised to see items that looked completely primitive compared to their high-tech equipment. She pulled out what looked like pieces of metal, some kind of white powder, and several small containers. "Basic chemistry and physics. Don't change, no matter how advanced your technology gets," she said. "What is that?" Aquilin asked through chattering teeth. "Magnesium powder, iron oxide, and a simple chemical ignition system. So Young explained as she mixed the powders in one of the containers. It's called thermite. Humans have been using it for over a century. That sounds dangerous, Gearlock observed. Everything about this situation is dangerous, So Young replied. The difference is, this danger is under our control. She moved to a corner of the shelter and carefully arranged the mixture. When she lit it, the reaction produced an incredibly bright light and intense heat. The temperature inside the shelter immediately began to rise. Amazing, Zephyr whispered, her glow becoming stronger as she absorbed some of the heat energy, but So Young wasn't finished. While the others warmed themselves, she went back outside into the freezing wind. Taemin followed her, curious about what she was planning. Help me gather ice, she said, pulling out a small metal container. We need to make water, and then we need to make steam. Steam? Why? Because steam carries heat energy much more efficiently than heated air, she explained while chipping chunks of ice with a simple metal tool. And because water vapor can be used to create insulation? Working together, they melted ice using the residual heat from the thermite reaction. So Young then used another chemical mixture to create a controlled heating reaction that turned the water into steam. She directed the steam around the inside of the shelter using pieces of fabric from their packs. Within 30 minutes, the shelter was warmer than it had been with the high-tech heating units. How did you know how to do this? Crystal asked, his crystal body no longer showing stress fractures. Basic human survival training, So Young replied as if it was obvious. My grandfather was a soldier. He taught me that technology fails, but chemistry and physics always work the same way. As the day progressed, more problems arose. The food heating system stopped working, leaving them with frozen meal packets that were impossible to eat. The water purification system failed, giving them no way to safely melt ice for drinking. Each time, So Young had a solution that seemed primitive but worked perfectly. For food, she showed them how to create a simple cooking fire using fuel tablets and a metal reflector to concentrate heat. For water, she demonstrated a filtration system made from cloth, sand, and charcoal that she scraped from their fire. Where did you learn all this? Aquilin asked as they ate their first warm meal of the day. Earth, So Young replied simply. Humans have lived on a planet with deserts, polar regions, mountains, and oceans. We learned to survive in all of them using only basic tools and knowledge. When you can't evolve special abilities, you have to get creative. That night, the temperature dropped even further. Their emergency communicators stopped working, victims of the extreme cold. Even the shelter's advanced materials began to stiffen and crack, but the humans had been busy during the day. So Young had taught Taemin how to create additional insulation, using layers of fabric and trapped air. They had built a secondary heat source using chemical reactions that would last through the night. They had even created a simple ventilation system to prevent carbon monoxide poisoning. This is remarkable, Gearlock said as they settled in for the night. His mechanical parts were functioning normally for the first time since they had landed. Your methods appear primitive, but they are more reliable than our advanced systems. Not primitive, Taemin corrected gently. Just different. When you can't depend on having the perfect tool for every job, you learn to make any tool work for any job. The second day brought new challenges. A storm moved in, bringing winds strong enough to tear apart their shelter and snow thick enough to bury them alive. Their rescue communicators were completely dead, and visibility was reduced to just a few meters, but again, the humans adapted. So Young showed them how to build a windbreak using ice blocks that they cut and shaped with simple tools. Taemin demonstrated a technique his father had taught him for navigation in zero visibility, using the wind direction and the feel of the ground under their feet. When Zephyr began to lose energy coherence in the storm, they created a sheltered area for her using reflective materials that concentrated what little light was available. When Aquilin's body temperature dropped dangerously low, they used controlled chemical reactions to warm water for her to absorb through her skin. You are saving our lives? Crystal observed on the second night. We're working as a team, Taemin replied. Your crystal body helped us cut the ice blocks. Aquilina's water manipulation helped us shape them. Zephyrus' energy form helped us find weak spots in our shelter. Gearlock's mechanical strength helped us move heavy materials. But the solutions, the ideas, those came from human knowledge, the crystal being insisted. Because human knowledge is different, So Young added. We had to learn to survive without natural advantages. That meant understanding basic principles that work in any environment. On the third day, rescue shuttles came to collect the teams. Out of 12 teams, only 4 had successfully completed the exercise. 3 teams had been. 3.5 years had passed since Taemin first arrived at the Galactic Military Academy. The nervous young human who had struggled with energy weapons was now a senior cadet, respected by his classmates and instructors alike. His body had grown stronger from constant training, and his mind had been sharpened by years of studying military, strategy, and alien cultures, but none of that mattered now as he stood in the observation deck. Looking down at the nightmare wall, the wall was even more intimidating in person than it had been in the classroom holograms. It rose from the frozen ground like a massive blade of ice, so tall that its peak disappeared into the gray clouds above. The surface was perfectly smooth, reflecting the pale light of the training moon's distant sun in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Tomorrow, said a voice behind him. Tae-min turned to see Yoon-dahi approaching. She was the highest-ranking human cadet at the academy, a brilliant student who had mastered every subject from quantum physics to interspecies diplomacy. Her test scores were among the best in academy history, and alien cadets often sought her help with difficult problems. He was also the most likely human to succeed at climbing the wall, if such a thing was even possible. Are you ready? Taemin asked her. She joined him at the observation window, her breath fogging the glass in the cold room. I've been studying Earth mountaineering techniques for the past year, she said quietly. Ice climbing, technical rock climbing, high-altitude survival. I've read everything I could find about Mount Everest, K2, the Antarctic expeditions. That's more preparation than most cadets do, Taemin observed. Most cadets rely on their natural abilities, Dahi replied. Humans don't have that luxury. If we're going to succeed, it has to be through knowledge and preparation. She was right, of course. In the years since the survival exercise on Delta 9, human cadets had gained a reputation for unconventional thinking and practical solutions. But the nightmare wall was different from any survival challenge they had faced. This wasn't about staying warm or finding food. This was about physically climbing something that seemed designed to be unclimbable. The other humans are scared, Dahi continued. Jae-sung tries to hide it, but I can see it in his eyes. So Young has been running calculations for weeks, trying to find some scientific approach that might work. Even you look worried. Taemin couldn't deny it. 500 meters of ice that's harder than steel, smoother than glass, and cold enough to freeze exposed skin in seconds. Plus an energy field that disables all advanced technology. It's not exactly encouraging. Through the window they could see other cadets taking their turn at observing the wall. A group of Vectmari were analyzing the ice composition with crystalline sensors built into their bodies. Several Velthari were discussing water flow patterns and thermal dynamics. The Quinger floated in a tight formation, their energy forms pulsing with complex communication patterns as they shared information about electromagnetic fields. Everyone was preparing in their own way, using their species' natural advantages. But Taemin noticed something that made him uneasy. None of them looked confident. Even the alien cadets, with all their evolved abilities, seemed nervous about tomorrow's challenge. What do you think our chances are? Dahi asked quietly. Honestly? I think we're going to fail just like everyone else has for the past 200 years, Taemin replied. But maybe that's not the point. What do you mean? Taemin pointed at the wall. Professor Glithmer said the Academy judges cadets on their preparation, strategy, courage, and how far they progress. Maybe the wall isn't meant to be conquered. Maybe it's meant to teach us something about attempting the impossible. It was quiet for a long moment. That's a very philosophical way to approach certain death by freezing. Despite the seriousness of the situation, Tamin smiled. Daihi had developed a dry sense of humor during her years at the academy. It was one of the ways humans dealt with stress that the alien cadets found fascinating. Daihi, can I ask you something? He said. Of course. Why did you really come here? To the academy, I mean. You could have had any career you wanted on Earth. You're brilliant enough to be a scientist, an engineer, a diplomat. Why choose the military? She considered the question carefully before answering. Because Earth is still new to the galactic community. Most alien species see us as primitive, barely advanced enough to be worth their attention. I wanted to prove that humans could compete with the best the galaxy has to offer. And have you proven that, I mean? In some ways, yes. Human cadets have the highest scores in tactical innovation. We excel at improvised solutions and cross-species cooperation. Our survival rates in hostile environments are better than most species, she paused, but we still haven't climbed the wall. That evening, the senior cadets gathered in the recreation center for what had become an unofficial tradition, the night before the wall attempt. It was supposed to be a casual social event, but everyone knew it might be the last time some of them would be together as classmates. The atmosphere was tense despite efforts to keep things light. Alien cadets clustered with their own species, discussing last-minute strategies and technical details. The air was filled with the sounds of different languages, the crystalline chimes of Vekmari speech, the flowing water sounds of Velthari conversation, the static-filled communications. Of the Quinder, Tamin sat with his longtime friends at a table in the corner. Aquilin's skin was pale with nervousness. Crystal's crystal body was dim, a sign of deep thought among his people. Zephyr's energy form flickered between colors rapidly, indicating stress. I have been analyzing the wall's energy field for months, Zephyr said, her static voice barely audible above the room's noise. I believe I can maintain coherence for perhaps 10 minutes in direct contact with the ice. That should be enough to reach 30 meters, maybe 40. My calculations show similar results, Crystal added, his musical voice subdued. The thermal shock will cause fractures in my crystal matrix within 15 minutes. I estimate 50 meters maximum altitude before structural failure. Aquilin's gills fluttered nervously. The water content in my body will begin to crystallize at approximately the 20-meter mark. I have been practicing techniques to slow the process, but... She trailed off, not needing to finish the sentence. What about you humans? Crystal asked, turning to Taemin and his roommate Jae-sung. What are your projections? Jae-sung, who had been quietly listening to the conversation, spoke up. We don't have projections based on evolved abilities, he said simply. We have plans based on equipment and technique. Equipment that will fail when it encounters the wall's energy field, Equilin pointed out gently. Not all equipment, Taemin replied. Complex electronics will fail, yes, but simple mechanical devices should still work. Basic tools, climbing spikes, ropes, these things don't depend on advanced technology. And what about the cold? Zephyr asked. Your organic bodies are even more vulnerable to extreme temperatures than ours. That's true, Jae-sung admitted. But humans have been climbing in extreme cold for thousands of years. We have techniques for maintaining body heat, for protecting exposed skin, for recognizing and treating cold injuries. At the next table, a group of mechanic cadets were discussing their approach. Their plan involved using their cybernetic components to resist the cold and electromagnetic effects longer than purely organic beings could. It was a logical strategy that played to their species' strengths. Nearby, a team of Vekmari were comparing notes on thermal energy manipulation. They believed they could create temporary handholds by channeling heat through their crystal bodies to melt small sections of ice. It was an elegant solution that made use of their natural abilities, but as Taemin listened to all these discussions, he noticed something troubling. Every species was planning to use the same types of approaches that had failed for 2 centuries. They were just hoping to execute those approaches better than previous cadets had. Has anyone considered that maybe the wall is designed to defeat exactly these kinds of approaches? He asked his friends. What do you mean? Aquilin replied. Think about it. The wall has an energy field that disables technology, perfect for defeating the Makani. It's extremely cold, ideal for stopping the Quinder and Velthari. It's perfectly smooth, no handholds for the Vekmari to use. It's almost like someone designed it specifically to counter every known species' advantages. Crystal's crystal body chimed thoughtfully. An interesting theory. But if the wall negates everyone's natural abilities, how could anyone climb it? Maybe by not relying on natural abilities at all, Taemin suggested. Maybe by using methods that work regardless of what species you are. You mean human methods? Zephyr said, her glow brightening with understanding. I mean universal methods. Basic physics and chemistry that work the same way for everyone. Later that night, Taemin lay in his bed staring at the ceiling. Through the window of his dormitory room, he could see the nightmare wall rising in the distance, illuminated by the training moon's pale lights. Tomorrow he would attempt to climb that impossible barrier, and he had no idea if he would survive the attempt. Jae-sung was also awake, lying quietly in the bed across the room. Are you thinking about home? Jae-sung asked softly. A little, Tae. Dawn broke gray and cold over Training Moon Delta 9, the nightmare wall, stood against the pale sky like a monument to impossibility, its surface reflecting the weak sunlight in patterns that seemed to shift and move. At its base, a crowd of academy instructors, support personnel, and younger cadets had gathered to witness the final trial of the senior class. Tae-min stood with his fellow cadets in a line facing the wall. Each wore the standard academy survival suit, designed to provide basic protection in hostile environments. But everyone knew the suits would provide little help against the wall's extreme conditions. Commander Velthik walked along the line of cadets, his mechanical parts clicking and whirring in the cold air. Today you face the ultimate test of your academy training, he announced, his amplified voice echoing off the ice. You will climb alone. No assistance from other cadets. No communication devices, no advanced technology. He stopped in front of the first cadet, a Vekmari named Sharpedge, whose crystal body sparkled with nervous energy. The rules are simple, the commander continued. Reach the summit by your own power and you pass. Fall, retreat voluntarily, or require rescue, and you fail. Medical teams are standing by, but they can only reach you if you signal for help or lose consciousness. Taemin looked up at the wall's peak, lost somewhere in the low-hanging clouds. 500 meters of perfect ice stretched above them. 2 centuries of cadets had attempted this climb. None had succeeded. Sharpedge, Commander Velthik called. You will attempt first. The Vekmari cadet stepped forward. His crystal body was nearly 7 feet tall and sparkled with internal energy. As he approached the wall, his body began to glow with heat, warming the air around him. Remember your training, called his instructor from the crowd. Channel your thermal energy carefully. Do not exhaust yourself too quickly. Sharpedge placed his crystal hands against the wall and began to climb. His body generated enough heat to create small handholds by melting the ice, and his natural crystal structure gave him excellent grip strength. For the first 20 meters, he made steady progress. Then the problems began. The wall's energy field started to interfere with his thermal generation. The handholds he created froze solid again within seconds. Worse, the rapid temperature changes were causing stress fractures to appear in his crystal structure. At 30 meters, Sharpedge's left arm developed a crack that ran from his shoulder to his elbow. At 40 meters, his thermal output dropped to almost nothing as his body diverted energy to structural repairs. At 45 meters, he fell. The crystal cadet dropped like a stone, his body ringing like a broken bell as he hit the ice at the base of the wall. Medical teams rushed forward, but Sharpedge was already struggling to his feet, his pride more damaged than his body. Sharpedge has failed the trial, Commander Velthik announced without emotion. Next cadet, Flowstream. The Velthari cadet approached the wall with confidence. Her blue-green skin shimmered with moisture as she prepared to use her species' water manipulation abilities. She had spent months practicing techniques for reshaping ice and creating temporary climbing holds. Flowstream began her climb by touching the wall and using her natural abilities to soften the ice just enough to create grip points. Her technique was elegant and efficient. She could literally reshape the wall as she climbed it, but the extreme cold was her enemy. Within minutes, her skin began to darken as her body struggled to prevent her internal fluids from freezing. Her movements became sluggish, and her ability to manipulate water decreased rapidly. At 20 meters, Flowstream's skills began to freeze shut. At 25 meters, ice crystals started forming on her skin. At 30 meters, she could no longer control her water-shaping abilities. She managed to signal for rescue before losing consciousness. The medical team extracted her using anti-gravity platforms, her body rigid with cold. Flowstream has failed the trial, the commander announced. Next, Cadet. Brightspark. The Quinder cadet floated toward the wall, her energy form pulsing with determination. She had theorized that her plasma-based biology might be able to resist the wall's energy field better than solid matter could. She was wrong. The moment Brightspark made contact with the wall, her energy form began to dissipate. The electromagnetic field that surrounded the ice was like poison to her species. Her golden glow flickered and dimmed as she struggled to maintain coherence. She managed to climb only 15 meters before her form became so unstable that she had to retreat or risk permanent dissolution. She floated back to the ground, her light barely visible in the gray morning air. Brightspark has failed the trial. One by one, the alien cadets attempted the wall. Each used their species-evolved advantages. Each employed strategies that had been refined over generations of academy training. Each failed. A Makani named Steel Core made it to 60 meters before his cybernetic systems began malfunctioning from the electromagnetic interference. His motor controls reversed, causing him to climb downward when he meant to go up, and he had to be rescued before his confusion caused him to fall. Another Thekmari, Clearsong, attempted a different approach by using her crystal body's natural resonance to find weak points in the ice. She reached 55 meters before thermal shock shattered her left leg and ended her climb. Velthari named Deep Current tried to use his species' ability to survive in extreme underwater pressure to resist the wall's hostile conditions. The cold defeated him at 35 meters when his cardiovascular system began to shut down. Each failure followed the same pattern. The cadets would start strong, using their natural abilities to make initial progress. Then the wall's defenses would begin to take effect, the energy field disrupting technology and energy-based biology, the extreme cold overwhelming thermal regulation systems, the smooth surface defeating attempts to create lasting handholds. By midday, 23 alien cadets had attempted the wall. 23 had failed. Some had been rescued unconscious. Others had retreated when they realized their situation was hopeless. A few had suffered injuries that would take weeks to heal. None had climbed higher than 65 meters, barely, more than 1/8 of the wall's total height. The alien attempts are concluded, Commander Velthek announced. We will now observe the human cadets. A murmur ran through the crowd of observers. Everyone knew that humans were considered the weakest species at the Academy. If the evolved advantages of the alien races couldn't overcome the wall, what chance did primitive humans have? Taemin looked at his fellow human cadets. There were only 5 of them attempting the trial today, fewer than any other species. Dahi stood at the front of the group, her face calm and focused. Jae-sung was checking his equipment one final time. So-young was making calculations on a piece of paper with a simple pencil. Nam Ji-ho, the newest human cadet, was doing breathing exercises to calm his nerves. Yoon-di, he commander called, you will attempt first. Dahi stepped forward, carrying a pack that looked very different from the equipment the alien cadets had used. Instead of high-tech devices, her gear appeared almost primitive: metal spikes, coiled rope, containers that steamed in the cold air, and tools that looked like they had been forged rather than manufactured. Are those Boiling water containers? Asked an instructor, sounding confused. Yes, sir, Dahi replied simply. And climbing spikes, anchor points, thermal layers, and emergency heating compounds? That equipment appears to be centuries out of date, Commander Velthik observed. It's based on techniques human mountaineers have used for over 1,000 years, Dahi explained. The principles haven't changed because the laws of physics haven't changed. She approached the wall without hesitation. Unlike the alien cadets, who had relied on natural abilities, Dahi immediately began using her tools. She poured boiling water from one of her containers onto the ice, creating a small area of temporary grip. While the water was still warm, she drove one of her metal spikes into the softened ice and clipped her rope to it. The crowd watched in fascination as she repeated the process, methodically working her way up the wall, one carefully planned move at a time. Her progress was slower than the alien cadets had been, but it was also steadier. At 20 meters, where Flowstream had been defeated by the cold, Dahi was still climbing strongly. Her breathing technique and thermal layering system were keeping her body temperature stable. At 30 meters, where most of the alien cadets had begun to struggle, Dahi paused only long enough to pour more boiling water and place another anchor. Spike. At 40 meters, she was higher than most alien cadets had managed, and she showed no signs of slowing down. Remarkable, breathed Professor Glithmore, who was observing from the crowd. She is using no advanced technology, no evolved abilities, nothing but basic tools and technique. At 50 meters, Dahi was climbing in conditions that had defeated crystal beings and energy creatures. Her simple human methods were succeeding where sophisticated alien approaches had failed, but the wall was not finished with her yet. At 60 meters, the wind began to pick up, creating a vortex effect around the wall that made climbing even more difficult. The boiling water in Dahi's containers was cooling faster, giving her less time to work with each grip point. At 70 meters, ice began forming on her equipment despite her. The crowd around the base of the nightmare wall had grown quiet. Dahi's remarkable climb to 90 meters had shown everyone that human methods could work where alien abilities failed, but her ultimate failure had also demonstrated just how impossible the wall truly was. If the Academy's top human cadet couldn't reach the summit, what chance did the others have? Taemin stepped forward when his name was called. He carried a pack similar to his but with some important differences. Where she had focused on refined mountaineering techniques, Taemin had gone back to even more basic principles. His equipment looked primitive even by human standards. Metal spikes that he had forged himself in the Academy's workshop. Containers of boiling water, but also packets of chemical heat sources that could maintain temperature longer. Most unusual of all were the gloves he wore. Thick protective gear, with retractable metal claws extending from the fingertips. What are those? Asked Commander Velthek, pointing at the claws. Climbing aids, Taemin replied simply. Based on the natural equipment of earth animals that climb ice, polar bears, Arctic foxes, mountain cats. If claws work for them, they should work for humans too. Several instructors exchanged glances. The idea of mimicking animal adaptations was not something any alien species had considered. They had evolved their own advantages and relied on them exclusively. Tae-Min approached the wall and began his climb using the same basic technique Dahi had demonstrated: pour boiling water to soften the ice, drive spikes for anchor points, use rope for safety. But his execution was different, more methodical and patient. Where Dahi had tried to climb quickly to minimize exposure to the cold, Taemin climbed slowly and deliberately. He spent more time at each position, ensuring his anchor points were solid and his heating systems were working properly. Most importantly, he used his clawed gloves to maintain contact with the ice even when his tools weren't providing perfect grip. The metal claws could penetrate the hard surface just enough to give him stability while he worked. At 20 meters, Taemin was climbing steadily. His breathing was controlled, his movements efficient. The crowd below watched in fascination as his primitive methods proved effective against the wall's defenses. At 30 meters, he paused to refill his water containers using a chemical heating system that So Young had helped him design. The process took several minutes, but it ensured he would have hot water available for the next section of the climb. At 40 meters, the electromagnetic field began to interfere with some of his electronic equipment, just as it had with the alien cadets. But Taemin had expected this. His backup systems were entirely mechanical, simple devices that couldn't be disrupted by energy fields. At 50 meters, he was climbing in the zone where most alien cadets had failed. But his human physiology, trained through years of deliberate conditioning, was holding up better than anyone had expected. His body heat regulation systems were working efficiently, and his mental focus remained sharp. The key difference was in his approach to the cold. While alien species had tried to fight against the extreme temperature using their evolved abilities, Taemin worked with it. He used the cold to his advantage, allowing ice to form on his anchor spikes to make them more secure. He timed his movements to match his body's natural heat cycles, resting when his core temperature was highest and climbing when his metabolism was most active. At 60 meters, Taemin reached the point where Dahi had begun to struggle seriously. The wind was stronger here, and the wall's energy field was more intense, but he had prepared for this too. His clawed gloves allowed him to maintain grip, even when his other equipment was failing, and his chemical heat sources were still providing warmth when purely mechanical systems would have frozen solid. "He's using a completely different strategy than any previous climber," observed Professor Glyphmore from the crowd below. "Instead of trying to overcome the wall's defenses, he's adapting to work within them." At 70 meters, Taemin encountered the same wind vortex that had made Dahi's climb so difficult. But instead of fighting against it, he used it to his advantage. He timed his movements to use the wind's upward currents to help lift him, and he positioned his anchor points to take advantage of the aerodynamic effects. The crowd watched in growing amazement as this human cadet, using nothing but primitive tools and basic techniques, climbed higher than any cadet in decades. There was no crystal energy manipulation, no water control, no plasma generation, just careful planning, stubborn determination, and an understanding of basic physics. At 80 meters, Taemin passed Dahi's previous record. He paused only long enough to check his equipment and refill his water containers, then continued climbing. At 90 meters, he reached the point where Dahi'd been forced to retreat. But Taemin's more conservative approach had left him in better condition. His equipment was still functional, his body temperature was stable, and his mental clarity remained sharp. At 100 meters, he entered territory that no academy cadet had ever reached. The wall became even more hostile at this altitude. The ice was harder, the cold more intense, the energy field stronger, but Taemin's methods continued to work. His claws found purchase where smooth handholds would have been useless. His chemical heat sources provided warmth where electronic systems would have failed completely. At 120 meters, ice began forming on his breathing apparatus. At 140 meters, his backup anchor spikes started to become brittle from the extreme cold. At 160 meters, even his primitive mechanical systems began to show stress, but Taemin kept climbing. His progress was slow now, each meter taking several minutes of careful work. He had to stop frequently to clear ice from his equipment, and to warm his hands and feet using his chemical heating packets. But he never stopped moving upward. At 200 meters, he was so high that the crowd below could barely see him. Radio communication had been impossible since the 50-meter mark due to the electromagnetic interference, so the observers had no way of knowing his condition, except by watching his steady progress up the wall. At 250 meters, halfway to the summit, Taemin encountered his most serious challenge yet. A layer of especially hard ice that resisted all his normal techniques. His boiling water had little effect on it, and his metal spikes could barely penetrate its surface. He spent nearly an hour at this level, working patiently with his tools to find a solution. Finally, he discovered that by combining his chemical heat sources with concentrated pressure from his claws, he could create small fractures in the hard ice that could be expanded into usable handholds. It was exhausting work, but it was effective. At 300 meters, Taemin was climbing in conditions that no living being had ever experienced and survived. The cold was beyond imagination. The electromagnetic field so strong that it created visible distortions in the air around him. But his simple, primitive methods continued to function when advanced technology would have failed completely. His claws had become his primary climbing tools now, the metal tips finding microscopic irregularities in the ice that his other equipment couldn't detect. His chemical heating systems were his lifeline, providing just enough warmth to prevent fatal hypothermia. At 350 meters, his water containers finally froze solid despite all his heating efforts. At 370 meters, his backup rope became so brittle that he couldn't trust it to hold his weight, but Taemin had planned for these contingencies too. He switched to a climbing style that relied almost entirely on his claws and body strength, using techniques he had developed by studying how Earth's Arctic predators moved across ice and snow. At 400 meters, he was climbing in a zone where the laws of physics seemed different. The electromagnetic field was so intense that it created strange optical effects, making the ice appear to shift and flow like liquid. The cold was so extreme that his breath froze in his lungs, forcing him to breathe through layers of insulation. But he was still climbing. At 450 meters, with only 50 meters left to reach the summit, Taemin faced his final crisis. His chemical heat sources were nearly exhausted, his claws were beginning to crack from the extreme stress, and his body was operating on the very edge of hypothermic collapse. Any rational person would have retreated at this point. The smart thing would have been to signal for rescue while he still could, to accept an honorable defeat after climbing higher than anyone in the Academy's history. Instead, Taemin looked up at the remaining 50 meters of wall and began to climb faster. He abandoned all caution now, moving quickly before his failing equipment could strand him on the wall. His claws scraped against the ice as he pulled himself upward through sheer force of will. His breathing was labored, his vision starting to blur from oxygen deprivation and cold. But he never stopped moving. At 470 meters, his left claw snapped. At 480 meters, his right ankle began to lose feeling from frostbite. At 490 meters, his vision was tunneling and his thoughts were becoming confused from hypothermia. But the summit was only 10 meters away. Taemin drove his remaining claws into the ice and pulled himself upward one final time. His body was failing, his equipment was destroyed, his mind was clouded with cold, and the rescue took 3 hours. Taemin had barely managed to activate his emergency beacon before hypothermia rendered him unconscious on the summit of the nightmare wall. The medical team had to use their most advanced anti-gravity platforms to reach him, fighting against the electromagnetic interference that had defeated so many previous rescue attempts. When they finally brought him down, wrapped in thermal blankets and connected to warming devices, the crowd of observers was still in shocked silence. The Academy flag he had planted at the summit flew proudly in the cold wind, 500 meters above the ground, the first flag any cadet had ever successfully placed there. Commander Velthik approached the medical transport where Taemin was being treated for severe hypothermia and frostbite. The human cadet was conscious but barely coherent, his body still shaking despite the warming treatments. "Cadet Lee Taemin," the commander said in his mechanical voice. "You have achieved what was considered impossible. How do you feel?" Taemin tried to speak, but his voice was just a whisper. "Cold?" he managed to say, and then smiled weakly at his own understatement. But the day was not over. 2 more human cadets still needed to attempt their climbs. Nam Jiho went next. He had watched Taemin's successful climb carefully, noting every technique and strategy. His own equipment was similar but included some improvements based on what he had observed. Most importantly, he carried additional chemical heating supplies to avoid the equipment failures that had nearly killed Taemin in the final meters. Jiho's climb followed the same basic pattern as Taemin's, slow, methodical progress using primitive tools and techniques that worked when advanced technology failed. He reached the summit in slightly better condition than Taemin had, though he still required medical attention for cold exposure and exhaustion. When Jiho planted his flag next to Taemin's, The crowd below began to understand that something fundamental had changed. This wasn't a lucky accident. This was a reproducible technique that worked. Park So-young attempted the wall last among the humans. As an engineering student, she had spent the morning making final calculations and adjustments to her equipment based on the successful climb she had witnessed. Her ascent was the most efficient of all, using optimized heating compounds and improved claw designs that she had developed using principles of materials science. So-young not only reached the summit, but did so in better physical condition than either of her predecessors. When she planted the third human flag at the top of the nightmare wall, it became clear that humans had not just conquered the impossible, they had made it routine. That evening, the Academy's senior staff gathered in the main conference room to discuss what had happened. Supreme Commander Tisara, the highest-ranking officer at the Academy, presided over the meeting. She was a being whose species was so ancient that their original form had been forgotten. Now she existed as a combination of organic tissue, crystalline structures, and pure energy that defied easy classification. In 200 years of Academy operation, she began, her voice echoing strangely as it emerged from her complex form, no cadet has successfully climbed the nightmare wall. Today, 3 humans accomplished the feat using methods that can only be described as primitive. Commander Velthik stood to address the assembly. The human approach violated every established principle of wall climbing strategy. They used no species-specific advantages. They relied on mechanical rather than biological systems. They employed techniques that are thousands of years old rather than cutting-edge technology. And yet they succeeded where our most advanced cadets failed, added Professor Glithmore. This suggests that our understanding of the challenge was fundamentally flawed. Supreme Commander Tizara activated a holographic display showing recordings of the day's climbs. Let us analyze what the humans did differently, she said. The recordings showed the contrasts clearly. Alien cadets had approached the wall confidently, relying on their evolved advantages and advanced technology. They had expected their natural abilities to overcome the challenge, and when those abilities proved insufficient, they had no alternatives. The humans had approached the wall with humility, assuming from the beginning that they would need to adapt and improvise. They had prepared multiple backup systems, alternative techniques, and redundant equipment. Most importantly, they had designed their methods to work regardless of conditions rather than depending on optimal circumstances. The wall was designed to defeat specific approaches. Supreme Commander Tissera observed, energy fields to stop the Quinder, extreme cold to defeat the Velthari, smooth surfaces to thwart the Thekmari, perfect electromagnetic interference to disable Mifani systems. But the humans didn't use any of those approaches, Professor Glithmore added. They used methods so basic that the wall's defenses were irrelevant. A new voice joined the discussion. It belonged to Ancient One Karthik, an advisor so old that his species had evolved twice during his lifetime. He rarely spoke, but when he did, everyone listened. The wall was not designed to be climbed, he said in a voice like wind through stone. It was designed to teach. For 2 centuries, we have been teaching our cadets that evolution's gifts are the solution to every problem. We have encouraged specialization, refinement of natural abilities, dependence on technological advancement. The room fell silent as the ancient being continued. But evolution's greatest gift is not any specific adaptation. It is the ability to adapt itself, to find new solutions when old ones fail. The humans have demonstrated this principle in its purest form. Supreme Commander Tisara's complex form shimmered with understanding. You are suggesting that the wall was meant to be conquered by the species least equipped to climb it? I am suggesting that the wall was meant to remind us why diversity of approach is more valuable than perfection of technique, Ancient One Karthik replied. The humans succeeded because they did not rely on being superior. They succeeded because they refused to accept that their disadvantages made success impossible. The next morning brought an unprecedented event. The first nightmare wall, Graduation ceremony and academy history. Tae-min, Jiho, and So Young stood at attention before the assembled academy. Their bodies still showing signs of their ordeal, but their spirits triumphant. Around them, their alien classmates looked on with expressions of amazement, respect, and something that might have been envy. Supreme Commander Tisara addressed the gathering from the main podium. Yesterday, we witnessed the fall of a barrier that had stood for 2 centuries, she announced. But more than that, we witnessed the demonstration of a principle that our academy had forgotten. She gestured toward the 3 human cadets. These beings have no natural resistance to cold. They cannot manipulate energy or matter with their thoughts. They possess no cybernetic enhancements or crystalline bodies. By every measure we have traditionally used to evaluate military potential, they should have been the least likely to succeed. The alien cadets in the audience shifted uncomfortably. Many of them had dismissed the humans as inferior when they first arrived at the academy, but they possessed something that proved more valuable than any evolved advantage: the ability to adapt, to innovate, to refuse to accept the limitations others placed upon them. Supreme Commander Tizara's form began to glow more brightly as her speech reached its climax. Today we learn a new definition of military excellence. It is not the ability to use superior force or advanced technology to overwhelm obstacles. It is the ability to find solutions where others see only problems, to adapt when others can only rely on their natural gifts, to succeed through innovation when others fail through overconfidence. She turned directly toward the 3 human graduates. You have shown us that the most sophisticated weapon in the galaxy is not a plasma cannon or a force field generator. It is a mind that refuses to believe something cannot be done, combined with the determination to keep trying until it is done. The ceremony concluded with the presentation of special commendations, not just to the humans who had climbed the wall, but to all the cadets who had demonstrated the courage to attempt it. But everyone present understood that something fundamental had changed in how the galaxy viewed human potential. In the weeks that followed, alien cadets began requesting instruction in human problem-solving techniques. The Academy's curriculum was revised to include courses on adaptive thinking and primitive technology applications. Most significantly, the nightmare wall began to be conquered regularly as cadets from other species learned to apply human methods with their own natural abilities. Tae-min remained at the academy as an instructor, teaching courses on survival, techniques, and unconventional warfare. His first lesson to new cadets was simple but profound. The strongest warriors are not those who never face defeat. They are those who refuse to stay defeated. The most advanced civilizations are not those with the best technology. They are those that remember how to solve problems when their technology fails. He would often end his lectures by pointing toward the nightmare wall, now decorated with dozens of flags from cadets of many species who had learned to combine their natural gifts with human innovation. That wall stood unconquered for 2 centuries, because everyone assumed it required special abilities.